Broadcasting live from our New England studio, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Object First and Enterprise Strategy Group in the Solution Spotlight, an inside look at enterprise technologies.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solution Spotlight featuring Object First and focused on achieving true immutability in backup storage. According to ESG research, 81% of businesses agree immutable backup storage is the best defense against ransomware. However, not all backup storage solutions can deliver full immutability and enable the quick and complete recovery that is essential for ransomware resilience. So how do you ensure your backup can withstand a malicious attack? That is what we will be exploring today with our two guest experts. Anthony Cusimano, Solution Analyst at Object First, and Simon Robinson, Principal Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks for having us.
Well, I'm glad you're here because the topic of ransomware is always top of mind here at Solutions Review. And it's only getting more and more precarious in terms of trying to protect yourself against it, given all the advancements in the other thing that's top of mind around here, AI, and then obviously eventually it's going to get even more complex when you bring in all kinds of additional technology. So I'm looking forward to the whole presentation. Now, I'm going to set everybody's expectations that we're going to let our two guests share their expertise at the beginning of the show, and you're going to get a lot of information in terms of research and a demo of Object First. And then we're going to come back, and I'm going to jump in with some questions. And if you have any questions, by all means, send them over, and I'll hang on to them here, and we'll throw them at our guest panel. But for now, Simon, I'm going to hand it over to you. I know you have some things you want to walk through. And I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Doug. Thanks for having us, and yeah, really excited to share what we have got prepared for you and your audience today. So, quickly introduce myself. My name's Simon Robinson. I'm Principal Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group. We are part of Informa Tech Target. If you don't know us, we are an industry analyst firm. We produce research and insight and advisory on trends around enterprise IT. And, we're a global firm, and this is one of the core issues that myself and my colleagues are focusing on. So I guess digging into what we've got planned for today, I wanted to share a few key highlights from some research that we actually conducted in partnership with Object First, really to understand, as you say, Doug, the scale and extent of the ransomware threat. Now, we obviously know that this is a massive challenge. It's increasingly one with board level visibility and attention. But it's also good to get a truer sense of this with some actual market data. And, once we've looked at that, we can dig into the effects and impacts of ransomware on the organizations that it's affecting. And this will give us a better sense of the importance of the backup environment, which we're going to dig into with Anthony, amongst other things. So we conducted a survey, as I say, in conjunction with Object First in the fourth quarter of 2024, with IT decision makers in mid-sized to large organizations. These were IT decision makers in North America and Western Europe. Now, the first thing we wanted to understand was just, have you as an organization experienced a ransomware attack? And as you can see, 2/3 said that yes, they had experienced at least one attack in the previous 24 months. What was surprising to us, I guess, was the proportion that had experienced multiple attacks, right? Over 2/3 of those, right? With almost 1/3 experiencing 3 or more attacks. And, we often say that ransomware is a case of when, not if. And I think this data point kind of underscores just the prevalence of the threat. So I'm afraid it does get worse though when we start to dig into it, because when we look at into the experiences of those who are attacked, this gets to explaining kind of why it's such a germane topic in, as I say, among organizational boards and senior decision makers. So ransomware attacks are designed to cause havoc, right, regardless of their intent, and the intent does change. Some attacks are designed to extract a ransom. Others are actually more designed just to cause maximum chaos. So what's important for an organization, if we kind of assume that an attack is going to happen, it's going to be, as I say, it's a case of when, not if. The important thing is to focus on recovery, right? So, and we can think of recovery from a couple of lenses. The first is operational recovery, right? So how long does it take to restore normal business operations? And as we can see here, fewer than 1 in 10 said they could operationally recover from a ransomware attack in less than 1 business day. Okay, so that's a very small number. And actually, half of respondents said it took at least 6 business days to recover. And for some, it's substantially longer. Okay, so that's kind of the operational recovery kind of lens of this. The second lens of recovery is around data recovery, right? So, and this is really where we kind of get into the heart of the matter, right? Ransomware attacks attack data, right? And data is the lifeblood, increasingly the lifeblood of an organization. Businesses, organizations cannot function without access to their data, you know, regardless of the type of data, right? This is critical data that they run their businesses on. It's also data that is often really, really sensitive, personally identifiable information, patient records. You know, the examples are kind of legion. Now, one of the things we wanted to understand here was how much of your data impacted by the attack were you able to recover? And as we can see here, just 27% managed to recover between 90% and all of their data. Everybody else recovered less than that, right? With a massive 43% recovering less than 3/4 of their data. So you think about the impacts of this. This is, if you cannot recover this data, this is potentially devastating to an organization. In fact, you know, there are multiple examples of the fact that ransomware has finished businesses. There's an example of a UK-based, I'm in the UK-based haulage company. This company has actually been around for over 150 years. They sustained a massive ransomware attack, and they simply couldn't recover from it, right? They went out of business. There were several hundred redundancies. We think about all of the impacts to the supply chain in terms of relying on that business. You know, really, really consequential impacts from this. So the impacts are definitely real. Now, you could be listening to this saying, yeah, this is all kind of, you know, stuff that we know. It's all pretty much well understood. The fascinating thing to me from this research is the prominent role that the backup environment is playing in all of this. And we can see from this data that almost all of those organizations experiencing a ransomware attack in the previous 2 years said that their backup data was targeted, right? And for more than half of organizations, backups were targeted most or all of the time, right? So the question is, well, why is that? And if you think about it, well, you know, a clean copy of data is the one thing standing between an attacker and their ransom payment, right? So it kind of stands to reason that the backup environment is right in the crosshairs for attackers, right? So this is why we're seeing such a level of focus on the backup environment. This is why we're talking about the importance of backup, because there's a huge education exercise going on amongst the IT community in terms of, we need to modernize and update our environment to effectively deal with this. So I'm actually going to dig into how organizations should be protecting themselves with Antti in a moment. But just before I do that, let me just say a couple more things. The first is that as I touched on, the impacts of ransomware are wide-ranging and can be profound. Right, going out of business is an extreme example, but it does happen. It is happening. But aside from that, there is a range of impacts that happen as a result of a ransomware attack. Right, cost is an issue, and there are various dimensions of the cost aspect: the payment of the ransom itself, the cost of recovery, the cost of upgrading and modernizing the environment, the operational and opportunity cost of having to focus organizational resources, senior management time on recovering rather than actually running the business, loss of revenue, reputational damage, and so on. So the costs are widespread and can be profound. The final thing I'm just going to draw on for now is, as I say, the organizations are now kind of realizing the extent of the threat, and that they simply need to pay some attention to their backup environment. And at the very least, they need to ask whether their backup environment is fit for purpose in this ransomware era, right? Now, I do think that this message is starting to get through. When we asked respondents in this study which capabilities they are likely to prioritize when making future decisions around their backup infrastructure, the top responses were kind of not backup things, right? There were security. They are implementing a zero trust architecture. I think these are quite profound changes in the way organizations are thinking about backup and, the most important thing, recovery. Traditionally, backup infrastructure wasn't designed with security considerations top of mind. And I think this is now completely changing. IT organizations are challenged to modernize and update their backup infrastructure. And, indeed, the last line of defense is now moving to immutable backup storage, and that is absolutely secure from deletion or alteration. And as I say, the good news is that the market does seem to be broadly understanding this. For example, I don't actually have this chart right now, but our research found that over 4 in 5 respondents agreed that immutability is the best defense against ransomware. Okay, so that understanding is absolutely starting to happen. Now, the question becomes, how do you actually do this, right? We kind of understand the problem, but how do we now begin to modernize the environment? There are a lot of different claims out there in the industry. One of the challenges is that some of these terms and phrases, buzzwords, get bandied around quite a lot. They can mean different things to different people, and immutability is sort of one of those terms. And it can seem quite confusing about what should be the best practice. Now, I think this is a good point to actually bring Anthony into the conversation. And actually, we hear a lot about immutability. As we saw, it's a critical piece of any ransomware recovery strategy. But sometimes it seems like immutability is treated like a bit of a kind of a checkbox item, right? And I know that Object First believes that there's immutability and then there's true immutability, right? We're going to get to that, but before we do that, can you just give us a brief explanation of what immutability actually is?
Yes, thanks, Simon. And it's so funny because I actually did a little reflecting yesterday. I'm coming up on 15 years in data protection, and it's only in the last few that I've really thought about what is immutability? And then just these last few months and doing this work with you all, that we've really kind of keyed in on what is the big differentiator between just regular immutability that you see on every marketing checkbox on people's white papers and data sheets versus what you're actually getting inside of backup storage or any kind of storage. So immutability at its core is leveraging the worm write once, read many ideology, the ability to send a piece of data to a storage location and keep it there inalterable for a specific period of time or forever. Immutable means that it cannot be changed. And I think people get into a lot of trouble because they understand the concept of write once, read many, but they fall into the trap of, well, if I give you admin permissions and privileges, maybe you could just go in and chmod that, and now we can delete the file or we can update it and change it. That's not immutable. And unfortunately, Simon, I think we're seeing in the industry, that's what a lot of people are delivering when it comes to their immutable storage.
Yeah. So you know, as I mentioned, you have immutability, or saying you have immutability, but
Right.
then offering true security across all of the potential vulnerabilities in the storage environment. Two very different things. So maybe walk us through the types of vulnerabilities that kind of you're seeing in the backup storage environment from a ransomware perspective, and then give us your take of what Object First believes true mutability actually is.
Yes. Well, I think, it really starts at us, the people, because we can trust storage and security all day and all night. And as long as, we put the rules in place, they'll always be followed. The problem is always going to be people, because if you're compromised or if I'm compromised or if my vendor is compromised, we suddenly have backdoor entries or administrative ways that people can go in and basically commit administrative actions that could be used for good for bad, right? So I think the big concept I want to get across when it comes to ransomware, everyone's looking at frontline security. They're looking at their antivirus, their detection, their firewalls. These are all necessary components, but you need to have an assume breach mindset, which, ties very well into the zero trust framework, basically saying it's not a matter of if, but when, and they might already be in. They could be sitting there lying dormant, gathering passwords, getting information, preparing for an attack. So with this mindset in place, you start to think, oh, if I am compromised, what could they possibly do? What could they do with my boss's credentials? What could they do with the CEO's credentials? All of these questions need to be asked and thought about from a zero trust perspective. Now, in terms of immutability, at the end of the day, it's basically just we want to make it so you can't alter or change storage once we set that immutability flag for any period of time. But just saying that isn't enough. So we've quantified 5 requirements for true immutability. And we have to put true in front of it because, again, everyone's saying they have immutable storage. Everyone's offering it as a tack on. But we know that it's not truly immutable if it can be altered or changed. So it starts with S3 object storage. It is, a standard today in many cloud environments like the Amazon Web Service. Amazon was the one who pioneered the secure, simple storage service, S3. And it's a fantastic option when it comes to storage for immutability because it leverages features like object lock, versioning, and compliance mode. These 3 things put together is, a rock solid standard that allows no one to change or alter a file once it is written for the period of immutability. So we insist that any immutable storage must be S3 object based. Zero time to immutability. This is a big one because we see a lot of vendors today that when they're moving their data, they're looking to move it to a landing zone before it lands in its final resting place. This can be done for performance reasons. This can be done because, data insights or, cleaning could be performed, or even for, compliance reasons. The problem is these landing zones, if they are not immutable themselves, fall victim to a man-in-the-middle type attack. If the landing zone for your data is not immutable, then you don't have truly immutable storage. It has to be immutable the second it is written for that retention period. The third qualification is zero access to destructive actions. And I've talked about this a bit already, but any administrative privilege is also an administrative curse, right? If you can go in, if you can alter the operating system, if you can commit root actions, you can go in and essentially delete the data. There's always going to be a workaround to get in there and alter it. So we believe that any immutable storage has to grant zero access for destructive actions against the operating system, the firmware, the storage layer, as well as the data layer. We also believe that immutability must come in a hardware form factor. The reason, again, is because if your storage is relying on an ESX host, if it's in some kind of container, or if it's in a hardware environment that doles out different levels of credentials and administrative privilege, again, it runs the risk of becoming part of a larger attack surface. In a hardware form factor, the attack surface is the hardware itself. So this leads right into the previous point. You have hardware with zero access to the firmware, the operating system, the data layer, the storage layer. There's no way to break any of those because it's all contained in a single segmented device. And that leads to the last point, is the segmentation of backup software and backup storage. We know that they like to go after the backup data first when an attack happens. The easy thing to get is always the backup data mover, the backup software. That's where they're looking for. If the backup storage is segmented, if it's fenced off, if it's in a different network or different domain, what you've done is essentially obfuscated and segmented, fenced off your software from your storage. Any separation is good in zero trust frameworks. And by separating all of these different components and pieces, by using things like zero access, least privilege access, zero time to immutability, you create an ecosystem that is not just immutable, but it's effectively ransomware proof. Pair this with the idea of 3-2-1, maybe have one segmented storage on site, one segmented off, and now you've got two different places of recovery. If there is a natural disaster or some other kind of failure at the network or power layer, so you can always get your data back. But I'm curious what you think about these requirements, Simon.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? I mean, I think many of the things that you talked about there align really well with some of the things that we found in this research study, and again, I think give an indication of how quickly the backup infrastructure landscape overall is evolving. Just the fact that these things are now front and center, but also that organizations do need to kind of double click on some of these things and really ask, okay, well, what is immutability version A versus version B really giving me? I think you mentioned zero trust, and we saw, as I indicated in the research, that organizations are actually adopting zero trust broadly as part of a ransomware defense strategy overall. More specifically, they are now starting to apply the principles of zero trust to their backup environment. To me, that is a really interesting indication of the maturity of how this whole space is evolving, how how the silos of IT of yesterday are starting to work and collaborate together. As we say, security really is a team sport, and so it's really good to see that these aspects are starting to come together. One of the things you mentioned, Anthony, was actually this notion of segmentation. I found that really interesting, and we actually double clicked on this within the research, and one of the fascinating findings was that target based appliances, i.e. backup storage systems that are separate from the backup software application. So when we asked in the research, kind of, did respondents feel that these were more or less aligned to zero trust, they overwhelmingly viewed them as more aligned to zero trust than kind of more integrated appliances that offer the backup storage and the software all in one. So again, having that segmentation is deemed to be more aligned to this headline strategy around zero trust that we see organizations pursuing. Now, organizations also tell us that these target appliances, yes, they provide this better compliance with zero trust, but there is all these additional benefits as well, right? So better security overall, more integrated cybersecurity features, even things like better backup and restore performance. So all those to me are really, really interesting kind of findings from this study. Now, Antti, I know it's object first. You are super focused on creating the the most secure, immutable backup storage for Veeam environments, right?
Right.
And we're going to dig into that. But I'm a strong believer that this is not about just having features, right? You got to think about the environment that organizations are operating in, the complexity that is now inherent within IT overall. In fact, we did some research just at the end of last year, and 6 in 10 organizations said that their IT environment had become more complex over the last 2 years. And if you think about all the things that are kind of going on in an environment, all the kind of applications that have been emerging over the last 20 years, the digital transformation initiatives, the fact that we now live in this multi-cloud environment, we've now got AI kind of thrown into the mix as well. The complexity is just astonishing. So it's not just about having the features, it's about packaging them into a solution that is easy to use and set up, right? And I think that is really, really becoming a really important requirement for organizations who, frankly, they just don't have the time to spend on getting into the details and weeds of managing all of these parts of the environment. So I know this is a big focus for you guys as well. So perhaps you could take a few minutes to provide us an overview of the object first solution.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with you, Simon. It's kind of scary how complex things have become these days. It's funny too, because we live in the world of as a service and apps, and everything's become so much simpler from a consumer perspective. But when you look at the business side of things, everyone needs to be an expert in everything. And we know that's just not possible. Right. So what we've done at Object First is created a product called Utbi. Pretty fun name to say, but it'll also get stuck in your head forever. And it's not just a fun name, but it has reason, right? It stands for out of the box immutability, which gives you a little bit of an idea of exactly kind of what it is just in the name itself. It's a storage solution that's offering immutability out of the box for Veeam. We live by our 3 pillars, which are that it is secure. And, I'm happy to show all of this in the demo in a minute here, but it's hardened by default. When you take this thing out of the box, we've already secured it to the nth degree. There's no optimizations or security expertise required by our end users to make this thing more secure. It is already as secure as we can make it. In fact, it is so secure, we give it out to various pen testers every year. Last year being the NCC group. They performed a series of tests over 2 months on our box. They found 20 critical issues. We addressed those issues, gave the box and source code back to them, and they were not able to crack it. So that's how seriously we take this out of the box security notion. It's incredibly simple. I often joke, one of the nice to haves when you're so secure that you limit the administrator's actions to do anything is you're basically buying back their time, right? There is no, and you'll see this in the demo, there's no going in and having to optimize or manage or tweak. It's all already done for the end user. So you can literally rack and stack, configure our box in 15 minutes. And I've heard many customers say, I don't touch it ever. It's just there and it just works, which is a rarity these days, especially given how complex and time attentive everything is. And the other luxury, building a product specifically for one vendor allows us to really tune the performance. So in this case, building backup storage for Veeam meant we were able to consume their SOS API, utilize the direct-to-object storage framework, and get really fast ingest speeds up to 4 gigabytes per second with hardware that doesn't scream all flash, right? Like we're not giving an all flash solution, but we are able to get very good speeds because of how we've optimized our framework, both from the operating system layer to the storage layer to the communications layer. And put this all together, and what you get is essentially a ransomware solution. So what do you say, Simon? Should we show them a demo?
Let's do it.
Let's dive in. So if we could just pull up my screen here perfectly. All right, so this is Ootby and what it looks like when you first launch the console. But I thought I don't normally show this, but I'm actually going to show some of the behind the scenes dirty work. I talked about the 15 minutes rack and stack, so we actually have a video of our textual user interface and what it looks like when you first set up a cluster. So you plug this thing into your environment, you connect your network cables, be it SFP or just regular old Ethernet, and you're presented with this textual user interface. I'll just click play here so you can kind of see this is a real setup of an Ootby. You'll notice it's just 2 minutes and 22 seconds in time. So it's basically how fast can you type your network information into a few different boxes. You fill out the information for both NICs, the network interface cards, and you give it your primary DNS, your alternate DNS. And again, it's how fast can you type here? And in this case, I recorded the video and I'm not the fastest typer. The video game skills don't always translate. But you enter this information, you do it again for the second NIC, and I'll just go ahead and skip ahead here just so we don't have to view me typing. And then you type in a host name. So in this case, we're going to call it Ootby01. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to call it capital Ootby with a lot of exclamation points, but that won't work because the exclamation points can't be entered. So we're just going to call it Ootby01. We're going to hit enter. It's going to run through and take these host name. It's going to take the network settings we put into those boxes. It's going to apply them to the network interface cards and configure the box. It runs through this operation for 30 or so seconds. Let's go ahead and skip ahead a little bit more here so you don't just stare at a screen. Then we give our backup node a cluster name. Now, interestingly enough, this is a single node, and those watching might wonder why a cluster. Well, when you have one node of Ootby, you're technically building a cluster to prepare for additional additions later on. So you do this once. So when you add your next node, everything's automatically load balanced, automatically added into the system, and you don't have to go through any of this rigmarole again. And it's not that much rigmarole, in all honesty, because again, 2 minutes and a password, and you're done. So that's the entire configuration process that anyone goes through when they purchase an Ootby. They'll then land inside of our web user interface. A little bit prettier than the textual user interface, but from here you can get all the information about the product. I actually like in our data center, this is one of our test units. We've been just beating this thing to death. So you can see we've got a warning here. We've got a couple warnings there. This is a real environment, right? Like we do tests in here and we really put this thing through its paces. You can see how much data is being used. But when you first set it up and it's clean and it's nice and it's ready to go, you're actually told to go to the security panel down here and create an S3 key. And it's as simple as just clicking the create key button. I would type in a password because obviously we want to ensure that if you are creating a key to view and write data to a bucket, we want to make sure we verify who the admin is. This is also verified through MFA. And you'll create a new key. We've got a bunch of keys here because a lot of folks use this box. But once you've done that, you come into S3 buckets. And you can see if I scroll down, we've got a lot of buckets in this environment because this gets used for a lot of different things. But creating a bucket, just as easy. You give it a name. It must meet these specific qualifications. And you'll notice here, enable versioning, required for immutability. It's checked by default. We give them the option to turn this off at bucket creation if they want to do a little test dev, right? This might be their first time using an Ootby. It might be the first time configuring it in Veeam. So if they want to create a non-immutable bucket, they can. But by default, it is enabled. And once enabled with versioning, it cannot be disabled for the lifetime of the bucket. And it cannot be deleted unless there is zero information in the bucket. And I'll get into a little bit more about when you can actually delete later. But two operations. You create your S3 key, you create your S3 bucket, and you are effectively done. This is where most users never touch Ootby again, which is a good thing, right? You don't want to spend your time managing a storage box. So what we would do in this case, if we created a new bucket, we come back to our S3 key. We would have made sure we written down our access key and the secret key, which you cannot see again once it's created for security reasons. And then we come into Veeam backup and replication. Now, inside of Veeam, we would go into our backup infrastructure. And we would go into, oh, excuse me. Yeah, it's not backup infrastructure. It's they've moved things. That's my problem. Every time Veeam updates, they change their icons and it throws me for a loop. We'd go into backup repositories, and in here, we'd create a new storage type. So I'm going to go click into our OOTB immutable bucket here, click properties. I'll show you a little bit of what this process looks like. So in Veeam, you type in your name for whatever this is going to be called inside the Veeam infrastructure and give it a description. This is where we copy our S3 keys. So when we create those keys, you would add it to your credentials here. You'd also type in your service point. So the service point is just the web user address for that cluster that we have. You'd click next. It's going to make sure that it checks all the settings and everything's good. You'll choose the bucket you want to write your data to. In this case, the ransomware proof bucket was chosen. You create a folder underneath that where Veeam writes its data. And yes, object storage doesn't technically have folders, but this is just a way that Veeam is doing its own data inside of the buckets, inside of the object framework. And then you'll notice down here, this is grayed out, which is a very good thing. But when you go through this creation process, you select how long your backups are going to be immutable for. And in this case, it was set for 14 days. Now, we can't turn this off, but we could change it. And this is where the magic really happens. So we have an immutable bucket inside of OOTB. Veeam is going to select how long the data it writes to OOTB is immutable for. So in this case, 14 days. That's 14 days from first full to last incremental. We will preserve all of that complete backup chain. So if you have a 7-day incremental window, it would technically be 14 days plus 7, because you're going to keep that first full around until 14 days after the final incremental is completed. Now, if we wanted to change this, if I come in here and I'm a bad actor, I'm going to change this to 1 day, or like 1 day, right? That's the lowest we can go. And I click next. That is only applied to any new backups written as part of new backup changes, not the incrementals and not the fulls. So the next full and incrementals, you would see that 1 day immutability window, but all of the previous data would be kept immutable for that full 14 days. This is just one more assurance that is put in place that guarantees that the immutable data stays there and non-deletable, non-alterable, regardless of level of privilege and permission on the Veeam user side. You would click next through the rest of this and it would just automatically configure. We don't need to sit through that, so I'll just click cancel. And then you'd come up to home. And in home, we have our backup setup here. Let me see. I want to see, when was the last run backup? So we did one that's from OOTB to Backblaze about 11 hours ago, and it was successful. It was in our data center. And you can see here, the way this backup specifically works is it's going to write in a sober or scale out backup repository to object first OOTB first, and then to Backblaze afterwards. Let's see, do we have one that's just going to OOTB? I'm sure we do. I think it's this file server backup. Let me just click in here and click edit. Simple overview. So in here, we got a couple of file systems. We're going to send them to that immutable object first bucket that we created in the last step. We're going to say keep all versions for the last 14 days. Now, the interesting thing here, another sort of gotcha, if the Veeam admin or the bad actor who's posing as a Veeam admin comes in and says, I'm going to change this to 1 day, even though the immutable data is set for 14. Yes, technically that data could be able to be expired. But on the OOTB side of things, because it's immutable and it has that 14-day window, we won't let you delete it. And this would end in an error if you tried. And I'll actually show you what that looks like in just a second. So you go through this process, you set it up, you set your archive repository if you need one, you put it on a schedule, and then you run it. And you can see here, we've run quite a few jobs. We've got quite a few things running here. But that's the ultimate configuration, right? You configure it on the web user side. You come into Veeam, you create your storage repository, you set your backup job, you point it to it, and you let it run. And it will run basically as fast as your network will let it. Coming back to our OOTB device here, just to give a little insights on what's actually going on under the hood. As I mentioned before, this is a single node cluster, but it is still a cluster. You just get a little information about, what kind of capacity this is, its IP address. But over here under disks, take a look inside of here. You'll see we have quite a few HDDs, spinning disks inside our framework. This is our RAID 6 array. So all data essentially lives inside of RAID 6. You can lose it to 2 disks, and we do include a hot spare if you need to swap it out at any time. But you'll also notice down here at the bottom, we have this 1.6 terabyte NVMe cache. Now, this is interesting in conjunction with what we talked about in true immutability, because this is technically the landing zone for all data we receive from Veeam. Everything comes over the network. It either lands, it goes through an SFP plus 10 gig or a typical Ethernet 10 gig connection, and it will land on our NVMe. But this NVMe is also part of our object storage framework. It's technically included in the bucket. So there is no non-immutable landing zone inside of the I just made up a new word, inside the receiving of Veeam data into our UTB storage device. It lands here so we can take advantage of the NVMe speeds and not bottleneck any of the operations through data management and data movement. And then we disseminate it to the RAID 6 afterwards. So it's a very elegant operation. And again, we did this so that there was no need for the end user to come in and tweak and optimize for performance. This was all built specifically to maximize Veeam's Smart Object Storage API, which does direct to object storage operations. So it lands on the NVMe, it goes to the RAID 6, and it stays there. If you needed to run an instant recovery operation, or if you needed to restore a file to a file server, some of that data, it comes off the RAID 6 back into the environment. So you do get a little bit of a hit on performance speed. We say generally it's about 400 to 800 megabytes per second on recovery, about 1 gigabyte ingest on ingest. But they're good speeds for what you need them for. And all of this scales linearly. So if I come back to our node view over here, if we had 4 nodes in this cluster, everything is multiplied by 4. It's complete linear scaling, meaning we would have 4 128 nodes of capacity, meaning that we would have 4 times 1 gigabyte per second ingest speeds, so 4 gigabytes per second. It all grows together. And again, there's no operational change from the end user or the Veeam's perspective. Your buckets all scale across the cluster. Veeam sees no difference in how it actually writes to UTB. And that's why we started off as a cluster. It makes management super simple long-term. Everything else is pretty standard, right? We can track events and alerts. We can come into settings and set up specific notifications. If we want to get SMTP or syslog, all of that's available. You'll notice we also have network time protocol, which helps stop against chronological based attacks. Updates are super easy. We pull them directly from the object first server. We also have offline bundles, which can be offered through support if you don't have direct connections to the outside world. So we've really thought through a lot of this from how do we make this as least touch, as least complicated, but the most secure as humanly possible for our end users. And the last thing I'll show, if I come in here and I'm just going to see what some of our data is. I know we've backed up some of this stuff and it's got a 14-day window. If I open up Cloudberry Explorer, which is just a third-party S3 browser, and I don't want to download the newest version, but I'm going to come into our immutable backups folder here. So this is part of that ransomware proof bucket, Veeam backup. If I come in here and just try and delete this, I really want to remove it. What you'll notice is it's going to be stuck on 0 for as long as that immutability goes for. It's going to be enumerating this for 14 plus however many days in that backup chain. So even if you have the S3 access key and secret key, and you go through an outside, you're just going through API or going through a third-party explorer like Cloudberry, there's no way to delete that data. No amount of privilege gives you access to perform those destructive actions we talked about. And that's why we believe that true immutability is so key for backup. You have to think about all the inroads and all the different ways that bad actors think about getting access to the data, how they can manipulate it, how they can destroy it. Because just like Simon's data showed, they're always going after the backups now. You know, the majority of the time, they know what the route to recovery is. They know how they don't get to pay the ransom. And we've really thought about this from top to bottom to create something that is effectively as ransomware proof as we can make it. And that's object first UPI, out of the box immutability, and that's the demo. So I think now is it time for Q&A?
Yeah, let me hop back in. That was great, and it always strikes me. So I find this fascinating because that's an incredibly compelling presentation, and yet everybody has something And I want to get both of your opinion on this because a lot of smart people have put in place a lot of sophisticated defense mechanisms, I guess. Where do they fall down and still become vulnerable for ransomware? Where do you see folks just not quite getting it right, or where they just have some sort of whatever it is, block, constraint that doesn't allow them to kind of get to that true protection?
For me, and this is going to sound like such a funny answer, it's hubris, right? Like,
I was going to
you
say
can
hubris.
have all the technology in the world and you can be the smartest security expert on the planet. And that's going to set you up in a bad way because you're going to think it's not going to happen to you. And there's always going to be a group of people out there thinking about how they can take advantage of the one thing you don't know, or the one thing you didn't prep for, or the one piece of new technology that we don't know about that they're off building. There's just always that X factor. And it is the hubris of, and unfortunately, I hate to say this, but like, nerds fall victim to hubris more than anyone because we think we're so smart, right? So, it's always going to be, oh, I know how to handle this. I know it's not going to happen to me because I've taken X, Y, and Z step. But what you didn't think about is there's a whole another list of letters and numbers out there that we just haven't learned about or accounted for.
Yeah, I mean, just to rip on that a little bit, mine would be also starts with HU. It's humans, right? It is, and this gets down to, yes, you as the admin, as the security architect, you understand all of the vulnerabilities. If your users do not, right? And this is where we see time and again, just kind of education is absolutely critical. If your users do not understand, the flags, the traps, and they're not being constantly educated on the importance of being vigilant, on doing the right thing, on reporting when they see something suspicious, right? That ultimately is how most people still get in, right? It's somebody clicking on the wrong thing because they didn't think about it, or it's too early in the morning and they just hadn't had their coffee yet, or whatever it was. I think that's still, it's taking advantage of just human error and just kind of the way that we're wired. And that does go hand in hand with, I think, with Anthony's point as well.
Well, and I think maybe that is the takeaway from that question, is that it's not necessarily the decision makers that are creating vulnerabilities. It's just the surface vulnerability of a large organization where you just have so many ways in, and there are just so many cracks that can be exploited, that you really do need to think, and expect and prepare for the fact that you just can't plaster them all over. There's going to be a few that are vulnerable.
Yeah, that's right.
So
and actually, just on that point around the surface area of the organization, right, is now vast, right? We are now kind of distributed. If you kind of rewind a couple of decades, our data was in a data center. That's why it's called a data center, right? And you needed to kind of secure that data center. Okay, you just focus on that space. Now you look at where an organization's data is. It's on premises in various systems, many of which are siloed. It's in the cloud, it's at the edge, it's on remote mobile devices. So it's kind of that kind of is just kind of magnifying the problem several fold as well.
Yeah, and this leads me to a question actually that someone has asked with regard to the size of environments that Object First caters to. So what can you share with regard to kind of where you see traction, where you're finding the most likely prospects, I guess, for Object First?
It's a great question. So today we have, it's pretty simple. It's a 64 terabyte a 128 terabyte and a 192 terabyte appliance that are available for purchase. And you can cluster those however you'd like. Mix match, doesn't matter. You can do a 64 with a bunch of 192s if you want to be weird. We don't care. We don't judge. But what I'll say is coming soon, April 2nd, there is going to be an announcement and a launch event that we're going to put on. And there might be some more sizes. So if those don't fit inside of your specific environment, do take the time to tune into that event and check it out, because there might be more capacities that could be a little more appealing, whether you're a small business or a large enterprise.
So another question with regard to a particular instance. We store some of our backups in the public cloud for long-term retention. Does Object First support this as well? And then I have a follow-up to that.
Absolutely. We love the public cloud. In fact, that's one thing that Object First doesn't do, is give you that cloud option. And it's 3-2-1, right? Everyone who's in the backup space knows 3-2-1. Just having a box on your in your on-prem infrastructure is never going to be enough, because I live in Florida, hurricane capital of the United States, get hit every year, lose my power every year. If our only data center was in Florida, we would be hosed for at least a week. That's why the cloud is so great. It's multifaceted, it's spread across many geos, many regions. The challenge is always going to be speed of recovery, right? Cloud is a fantastic disaster recovery option, but it's not great against ransomware rapid recovery. You're always going to be paying that tax coming back. And your most precious data is probably the most recently created. So we see it as very much just a loving relationship. You use Object First UTB for those first 30 days, however long you want to keep your backups really fresh and on-site and rapid recovery ready. And then leverage cloud for long-term retention. It's great for that compliance use case, keeping things in a cold tier, glacier, or cold blob storage, and taking advantage of that, especially in the case of disaster.
Well, and as a follow-up to that, they had a second part, which was, do you support air gapping?
The old air gap question. So it's interesting, right? Because the concept of air gap is essentially that there is no way that you can contact the device via networking or any basic way to get to, like tape is the perfect air gap, because you can remove the tape from the tape library. And many people offer what's called a logical air gap, right? We've disconnected the NIC in the device manager, so it's logically air gapped, but that NIC is still connected to the hardware. So no, we don't offer a physical air gap or even a logical air gap. But what we do is that zero access policy, right? There's no way you can get access to any of the frameworks or underlying architecture or infrastructure of our box, because we realize even having a logical air gap is not enough. And being able to physically unplug the device from your data center is not a practical way to live your life, especially when you want to run backups multiple times a day. So we see air gap as great when it comes to things like tape or actual physical removable data, but it just doesn't work when it comes to integrated or purpose-built backup appliances.
Well, so while I have you both, I know we've been talking about ransomware and rightfully so, but I do want to talk about the other threats that a solution like Object First UTB can protect against. I mean, what are we talking about here? And just we might as well go all the way down the full fear-mongering path. I mean, what else is out there? What other monsters are lurking? Share a little bit more about what folks should be worried about in 2025.
Well, Simon already mentioned the human angle, and I hate to say it, but I have witnessed oops, I accidentally unplugged the network connector and we've just lost access to everything. I mean, that's the most common. I mean, I don't have stats to back this up, so Simon can tell me I'm wrong, but human error has to be the most common reason things go awry, right? And it's also probably why ransomware gets through as often as it does, is we can't account for everything. And what we do know is in business and in technology, everything that can go wrong will, because nothing is built to last. So, human error is a big one, but I mentioned disasters, I mentioned the hurricanes. These are real threats, right? And just, I get a bad thunderstorm, once or twice a week. I'll get a power flux. And a power flux for me is, 5 minutes and the Wi-Fi router's back up. But a power flux for a large organization could actually mean data loss if data is not synchronously being connected and transferred between its main site and its offsite. That could be lost business, right? If you're a financial institution and you're taking active transactions when your network goes down and it doesn't sync with the corporate server, that is potentially a very bad situation for business loss. And backup isn't the only answer to that, but things do go wrong, and they do go wrong often. And there's way more ways that it can fail than ways that it will just continue to be business as usual. So having that mindset of, are my backups up to date? Do I have a quick recovery policy? What can actually cause my company to go under and fail? And really think through those situations. And the last thing I'll say is, it's not even what can go wrong, but it's, have you actually tested it, right? Because you might have everything you need to be successful, but if you've never actually run through a recovery operation, your knowledge gap is going to be the issue because you don't know what you don't know. So taking the time to actually plan for, run through full disaster recovery, ransomware tests, assume you have no network connectivity, assume you can't contact people through email because they love to take out Active Directory. What do you do by yourself in an isolated incident where you have to bring your entire company back up online? And if you don't have that plan in place, it's just as bad as not having backups at all. So there's a lot of ways things can fail. And I think it's important that you take the time to really think through it and run through those tests.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of add to that, I mean, don't want to get all Donald Rumsfeld on this, but there's the kind of known knowns, there's the known unknowns, and then there's the unknown unknowns, right? And I think we know the extent of the user challenge, right? And I think again, it's the focus has to be on education, as well as zero trust and least privilege, and all those types of things, as well. Ransomware is, we are in the midst of a ransomware epidemic, right? And I think we do need to take this seriously, and I think the evidence, our research suggests that that is happening. If I think about kind of, well, what's going to be next? I mean, security has always been kind of a bit of a whack-a-mole. You kind of just get your arms around one of the challenges, and then something else pops up. And that is unlikely to change. That's just the nature of the evolving threat landscape. The AI piece is probably the biggest known unknown, right? We just maybe an unknown unknown as well. As we entrust more of our data and feed data into these models, then what are the risks that model is going to unwittingly surface something that we didn't mean to be surfaced, right? And that is a very, very, we could spend at least another hour kind of going through the risks around that. But if I were to think about what the next big things that organizations are starting to think about, that's something that we need to take seriously as well.
Yeah, no, the AI piece is just an absolute wild card, and I don't think there's any question that it creates even more of a human vulnerability, because it will ultimately be able to represent itself in a very human form to us anyway, in a two-dimensional digital way, and I think we're going to have to at some point just embrace zero trust wholeheartedly, which it's surprising that it hasn't been fully embraced, but I don't think there's any question we're going to have to at some point just admit that we don't know exactly who we're interacting with anymore, whether that's a digital entity or some carbon-based life form. But while I have a few more minutes, I know we want to try to share a little bit more about how people can find out additional information about Object First. I think we have some QR codes we might want to share.
That's right. Yeah, we've got one last slide to share, and there's a lot of ways that you can interact with us. So if you hit the learn more with your phone, or however you scan QR codes these days, another piece of technology that's constantly evolving, you'll go to our website and you can learn all about our product, Utbe, and everything I showed you. You can request a demo. If you weren't convinced that I was telling the truth, you can have someone else show you. or you can just contact us and learn more about that process. And I know we have one more after this one, which is our Zero Gravity Live series. And this is my own little passion project. Me and my team have come up with a recurring live show we do once a month where we just talk about technology and specifically things like ransomware and how it's impacting folks and what you can do about it. So it's just a fun way to, if you're not sick of me from this, check out more of me talking about things like this.
Yeah, this has been tremendous, and we would encourage, obviously, everybody to scan some QR codes or head over to Object First to see all the things that are happening on the site. There's a whole pile of additional information, case studies, and other resources and similar events like this that you can check out. But thanks very much for the time today. This was again, I love events like this where we get the facts, we get what people are thinking, and we also get some really practical and solid advice as to steps you can take to prevent the next big ransomware attack. So best of luck for the rest of the year, and we look forward to talking soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Doug.
So there you have it, another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Simon and Anthony for that presentation, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.